The roots of the elder tree pierced deep into the crust of Sereth Prime, curling like ancient stone serpents through cavern after cavern. No one knew what had once grown there. The tree had died thousands of years ago, but the earth beneath it still pulsed with warmth, as if the memory of life had not yet faded. Kalo Viren wiped dust from his visor, blinking as his light scanned across the newly opened corridor. The air was thick with stillness. No wind, no vibration, just silence so deep it made your heartbeat sound like thunder. He turned to his assistant drone. Log this. Designation Kalo V Entry 312. Possible pre-Exodus artifact structure. No signs of biological traps. The drone clicked twice in acknowledgement, then floated ahead. Kalo followed, boots crunching on ancient crystalline dust. His breath fogged slightly inside his helmet. There was no reason for it. No cold, no temperature shift, just instinct. He felt watched. The hallway narrowed. Symbols marked the walls, etched not with tools, but with heat. A language he did not recognize, but it felt heavy. The kind of writing not meant to be read, meant to be remembered. Then they reached the door. No panels, no visible lock, just a circle of stone, perfectly smooth, humming with an energy too old to have a name. Kalo reached out. The moment his fingers touched it, the ground breathed. A low pulse, like the exhale of something vast and long asleep. The stone door shivered, then peeled apart in layered rings, revealing a chamber bathed in soft blue light. And in the center, hovering just inches above the floor, was a stasis pod. Kalo stepped in. The walls were covered in living crystal, glowing with embedded data streams. A slow heartbeat echoed through the room, not mechanical, but organic. The pod was simple. No display, no tech ports, just glass. And inside, a man. His body looked untouched by time. Muscular, perfectly still, arms crossed over his chest. His hair was short, black, dusted with silver at the temples. Scars trailed his shoulders like stories written in flesh, and his eyes were open, staring at Kalo, not blinking, not breathing, just watching. Kalo stumbled back, nearly dropping his scanner. Then the lights flared. The symbols on the walls blazed gold. The pod hissed. The man sat up, slowly, powerfully, without urgency, and said one word. Not in any tongue the translator could identify. But Kalo understood it anyway. Why? He couldn't speak, couldn't move. The man stepped out of the pod, barefoot. His eyes scanned the chamber like someone recognizing a dream after years of forgetting. Then he looked at Kalo again. And this time, he spoke clearly. "My name is Rain Voss." He took one step forward. "And if you're the one who woke me, another step. Then I hope you are ready for what comes next." Outside, across the stars, a signal activated, ancient, buried, feared. It pulsed once, twice, and on worlds, long asleep, red text appeared on black stone. "They have awakened. What would you do if you uncovered a secret meant to stay buried? Would you run, or would you listen? Share in the comments. Was Kalo's discovery salvation, or the beginning of something far older than war? The signal shot outward, like a scream swallowed by silence for too long. It was not loud. It was not even heard by most. But to the right ears, to ancient satellites still orbiting dead moons, to black box beacons sealed inside long-forgotten warships drifting in asteroid belts, it was everything. A single pulse, then three more. A sequence buried so deep in the galactic archives that even the high librarians of Celestis Prime had declared it lost to myth. And then, one by one, the old machines woke up. In the diplomatic chamber of the Eunice Core Council, lights flickered. The central map glitched for a breath, then displayed a red glyph none of the advisors could translate. Security protocols rebooted. The Chancellor of Trade, a seven-limbed reptilian veteran, froze mid-sentence. His eyes narrowed. "That symbol," he hissed. No, it's not possible," whispered another. On the command deck of the Volarian Super Dreadnought Spirefang, Deep in Sector 19, a message blinked on the captain's screen. Code Zeroth initiated. Humanity, active. All across the galaxy, legends were no longer legends. The humans were real, and one of them had just awakened. Back on Sereth Prime, Kalo stood frozen in the crystal chamber. Rayan Voss had not moved far. He stood in the center of the room, barefoot, on ancient stone, eyes closed, head tilted slightly, as if listening to something Kalo could not hear. "The echo is spreading," Rayan said softly. "They will come now." Kalo finally found his voice. Who are you, really?" Rayan opened his eyes. "I am not the beginning, and I was never meant to be the last." He gestured toward the walls. "This place was built to keep me asleep until I was needed again, until the balance was broken, until the stars forgot why they once feared what walked in human skin." Kalo's voice trembled. "Feared?" Rayan looked at him, and something deep in his gaze shifted. Not anger, not cruelty, but certainty. "We didn't conquer by accident," he said. "We didn't lead the galaxy by being stronger. We led because no one else could hold the weight of what came next." "And now?" Kalo asked. Rain stepped past him. "Now the weight has returned." In the capital of the Threxian hierarchy, red alarms sounded in the genetics lab. The lead scientist stared at his readings. "What's wrong with Subject Archive 12? His assistant asked. The scientist paled. "It's not malfunctioning," he whispered. "It's responding. It recognizes the pulse." "From what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he typed in a command and opened a forbidden file, its title scarred and encrypted. It read, "Do not engage. If humanity awakens, do not resist." The assistant blinked. "But that's not protocol." The scientist looked at him and said, almost in prayer, "It's a warning from the last war." Kalo followed Rain up the slope of the cavern, toward the surface. "I didn't mean to wake you," Kalo said. You were meant to," Rayan replied without turning. Every chamber had a failsafe, each designed to awaken with the right touch, the right question, the right moment. "What moment is this?" Rayan stepped out into sunlight and looked to the stars. "The moment the galaxy forgets fear and remembers why it should have never stopped." He raised his hand. A beacon activated, hidden beneath the skin of his forearm. It pulsed once. Elsewhere, beneath the oceans of Argys 6, another chamber stirred. In the frozen tunnels beneath the dark side of Luna's twin, an eye opened. One by one, the others began to wake. The Scar did not send diplomats. They sent dreadnoughts, 50,000 of them. The sky above Sereth Prime turned black with metal. The planet's protective rings flared as orbital defense systems activated, but even their ancient AI hesitated when it saw what approached. The Scar had come, not to speak, to erase. They were the galaxy's oldest warrior species, still standing. Biomechanical giants bred for war, hardened by centuries of conquest, each born with skin tougher than alloy and minds wired for obedience. Their leader, Thrask the Unyielding, stood at the prow of the flagship Blood Howl, staring down at the planet below through a visor etched with the skulls of his fallen enemies. His voice echoed across all open frequencies. "We do not parley with extinction. Humanity was warned. Now it will be finished." Rayan Voss stood on a hill overlooking the city ruins of Sereth, the wind tugging at his simple cloak. No armor, no shield. Only a short pulse spear strapped across his back, and the same calm that never left his face. Kalo stood behind him, watching the sky darken. "They outnumber us, massively," Kalo said. Rayan didn't look away. "They always did." A sonic boom split the sky as the first Scar landing pods tore through the atmosphere. They struck the earth like hammers, erupting in flame and dust. Within seconds, the valley below filled with soldiers, towering forms with red eyes and blades for arms, surrounding the hill like wolves circling a campfire. Kalo reached for his sidearm. Rayan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not yet." The Scar formed into rank and file, perfectly synchronized, their boots slamming in rhythm with thunder. In the center, Thrask descended from the lead pod, each step leaving cracks in the stone. He removed his helm, revealing a face more metal than flesh, with eyes like burned coals. "You are alone," Thrask bellowed. "No fleet, no army, no flag." Rayan stepped forward. "No need." Thrask's laughter was deep and brutal. "They called you a legend. You look like a man." Rayan's voice was quiet. "Then come prove it." Thrask raised his hand. The scar charged, thousands of them. Kalo couldn't breathe. Rayan moved, not like a man, like memory made flesh. His feet didn't strike the ground. They slid. His body turned with the wind. His pulse, spear spinning, striking, redirecting. The scar fell like rain, not because he was faster, but because he was inevitable. He struck one through the chest, twisted the spear, and vaulted into the air. He landed on the back of another, snapping its neck with a single twist. He used their size against them, their weight, their arrogance. And with every fallen scar, more paused. Because this wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Smoke coiled around the hill, and when it cleared, only Rayan stood, his cloak torn, his knuckles bloody, but breathing and smiling. Thrask stepped forward, now alone. "You will not defeat me," he growled. Rayan dropped the spear. "I don't need to." He raised his fists, simple, human. And when Thrask lunged, Rayan sidestepped, one strike to the jaw, one to the neck, the last into the chest plate, so precise it cracked the reinforced core beneath. Thrask collapsed, not dead, but broken. Rayan turned to the surviving scar and said only this: "Tell the galaxy, we are awake. We are not at war, but we are not sleeping anymore." One by one, the scar backed away. Some bowed, others simply turned and ran. Kalo stepped down the hill, stunned. "You fought an army with nothing but—" Rayan looked at him and finished the sentence. "Discipline." The Blood Howl was the pride of the Scar war fleets. 10 kilometers of armored fury, equipped with neutron cannons, quantum disruptors, and a hull reinforced with alloy forged inside collapsing stars. It had never been breached, never boarded, never even dented, until now. It began with a shadow, a blur too fast for scanners, too quiet for alarms. Rayan Voss did not arrive by fleet. He dropped, from orbit, unaided, no pod, no shield, just a descent like a falling blade. The hull of the Blood Howl screamed as his body slammed through its upper decks, carving through corridors, bursting through steel bulkheads like paper. Emergency lockdowns failed to track him. Automated defense turrets misfired in every direction. He moved like memory awakened, and he had one purpose: find Thrask, end the threat. Thrask stood in the central war chamber, surrounded by lieutenants, staring at the alert screen as red alarms pulsed across every floor. "Single life form," growled his second in command. "No identification, no breachcraft." Thrask knew. His jaw clenched. "Human." The blast doors behind them exploded inward. Smoke, silence, then steps. Rayan entered the chamber alone. Blood on his knuckles, not his. He looked around at the towering warriors, then at Thrask. "I gave you a warning." Thrask snarled and activated his battle form. Metal plates extended, arms split into quad blades. His voice shifted, now layered with inhuman echo. "You should have stayed buried." Rayan unstrapped the pulse spear from his back and let it fall to the floor with a clatter. "No weapons today," he said. "You wanted the last of us, now you have him." The Scar lunged first. Rayan didn't dodge. He stepped into the strike, deflecting a blade with his forearm, letting it graze his ribs, and drove his elbow up into Thrask's jaw. A crunch followed. The Dreadlord roared. He grabbed Rayan by the throat and slammed him into a pillar. Sparks exploded. Metal cracked. Rayan's body went still, then he grinned. He hooked his leg behind Thrask's knee, twisted midair, and flipped them both across the chamber. They landed hard, and Rayan struck 4 precise blows in less than a second, each one at a known scar weak point, each one surgical. Thrask gasped, for the first time afraid. "You don't fight like the others," he rasped. Rayan stood, breathing steady. "Because I remember what fighting is for." Thrask summoned his core blade, a plasma-edged war weapon, twice the height of Rayan. But Rayan had closed the gap already. One step, one leap, one final strike. His fist struck the Dreadlord's chest, just above the energy chamber. A sound followed that none of the Scar had ever heard. The sound of a god falling. Thrask crumpled, his core flickering, smoke trailing from his mouth. Rayan stood over him, chest rising and falling with quiet rhythm. He turned to the watching Scar officers. "I am not your enemy, but I am your memory." He lifted the body of Thrask onto his shoulders and walked back through the shattered hull, out of the ship, down to the surface, and laid the Dreadlord's broken form at the feet of his army. Then he said only one sentence: "Choose what comes next." They didn't kneel, not at first, but one by one, they dropped their weapons and bowed, not to a conqueror, but to something older, respect. The Scar were gone, not defeated, changed. Their fleet, once a moving wall of conquest, now drifted in orbit around Sereth Prime, like sentinels, silent, waiting. And beneath them, in the cracked valley where Rayan had ended Thrask, something far older than even the Scar stirred. Kalo Viren stood beside Rayan, at the base of the ancient monument. "I thought this was just a myth," Kalo whispered. "It was," Rayan said, "until today." They had followed the glyphs etched into the Scar's battlefield, each one matched to the human deep code Rayan carried beneath his skin. A sequence, a pattern, not a weapon, a key. Rayan stepped forward and placed his palm against the stone. The earth rumbled, the mountain split, and from within, a massive slab of alloy lifted upward, revealing a vault carved from obsidian and humming crystal. At its heart sat a vessel, slumbering beneath a dome of light, not a warship, a ark. She shimmered gold and black, her hull traced with etched runes and half-faded insignias of Earth's lost fleet. She was alive, her systems humming like breath, held for 10,000 years. Her name blinked onto the console, Vigilant Dawn. Kalo's eyes widened. "That's," Rayan nodded. "The first mobile command ship, designed to awaken when we did." He approached the interface. No passwords, no encryption. The ship recognized his presence, his heartbeat, his memory. Systems booted, and then a projection appeared. A woman, not real. A hologram. A synthetic voice wrapped in old affection. "Welcome back, Commander Rayan Voss." Kalo took a step back. "You commanded this." "No," Rayan said. "She commands herself. I just listen better than most." Lights flickered along the walls, and from the center console, a new map unfolded, projected in midair. A full star chart, overlaid with ancient markers, thousands of them, each a pinpoint of blue, each labeled with one word: human. Kalo stared. "These are," Rayan's voice was quiet, "sleepers, survivors, seeds scattered across the stars before the collapse." "And they're still alive?" Rayan nodded. "Most, waiting in sealed chambers, stasis fields, deep cryo, built to last, until the moment someone like me returned." Kalo was speechless. Rayan touched one glowing point near the edge of the galactic rim. "This one," he said, "is a medic squad that went down during the Corran Plague. They held the cure, but the galaxy forgot them." Kalo looked around the chamber. "This ship, it's not a warship, is it?" Rayan turned, his eyes calm but heavy. "Number, it's a rescue." Then the ship's engines flared, not in violence, but in remembrance. She rose from the vault, slicing through rock and sky, hovering above Sereth Prime, like a silent promise. Rayan stood at the edge of the boarding ramp, and spoke one sentence into the universe. Let the galaxy remember, we did not vanish, we waited, and now we return. And across star systems, receivers once buried in ice and sand activated. Sleepers began to stir, and the second age of humanity opened its eyes. The message was not a transmission, it was a signal, encoded in a pulse only human-crafted machines could hear, wrapped in an algorithm of emotion, not language, a frequency of memory, grief, and fire. The vigilant Dawn hovered at the edge of Sereth Prime's orbit, her engines humming with purpose. From her bridge, Rayan stood before a console that had not been touched in 10,000 years. A final key sat waiting. His hand. He placed his palm on the panel. The lights dimmed. The ship's core glowed gold. And then the signal went out. Across the galaxy, it began. On the mining colony of Dral Keth, buried beneath centuries of dust, a beacon blinked inside a sealed tower. One heartbeat, then two, then a voice. Rayan's voice filled the airwaves. This is Commander Rayan Voss. Humanity has awakened. To those who remember, come home. To those who fear, choose peace. On the ice moon of Sovara, a forgotten sleeper pod hissed open. A woman with silver hair and eyes that remembered fire stepped out into the cold, her breath fogging as she whispered, "I heard him." In the jungles of a war-racked moon, a boy pulled a rusted transmitter from the mud. Static screamed, then softened. "I am not your weapon," Rayan's voice said. "I am your reminder." The boy looked up and smiled. Inside the high halls of the Galactic Council, panic bloomed. Dozens of species shouted across the chamber. "They are waking up. This cannot be. We buried them." One voice cut through the noise. A senator of the Melthari, eyes trembling. "They are not invading. They are calling their own." Silence until a broadcast override surged through every diplomatic channel, every major system, every planetary net. Rayan's voice again, calm, centered, unapologetic. "We are not here to conquer. We are not here to claim. But if you raise your weapons against us, we will not run. We did not sleep because we were weak. We slept because we chose peace. But peace does not mean absence. We have returned." The message ended, but it echoed in barracks, in temples, in dark rooms where old generals stared at maps they thought had no more ghosts. Kalo stood beside Rayan on the observation deck of the Vigilant Dawn. "You just declared war." Rayan shook his head. "I offered choice, but they'll see it as a threat." Rayan looked at the stars. "They always did." Kalo exhaled. "What if they don't listen?" Rayan turned to him. "Then they'll learn, not from our vengeance, but from our presence." He walked to the main screen and tapped into the network again. A map unfolded, worlds lighting up, dots turning blue, a ripple spreading from system to system. Kalo whispered, "We're everywhere." Rayan nodded, "And we always were." Then he spoke once more into the stars. "To every lost human, to every forgotten mind, to every soul still breathing in silence, wake up, not to fight, but to be seen again." Across planets, lights came on in ancient vaults. Doors opened. Eyes blinked. The galaxy had heard the call, and it would never sleep again. They called it the Reckoning. But it was not war, not in the way the galaxy expected. Rayan Voss and the Vigilant Dawn did not return to the stars with fire. They returned with presence, with memory, with something far more dangerous than weapons: clarity. On the fractured colony of Delros 4, two warlords prepared their mechs for battle. The sky above trembled as a ship approached. They expected orbital strikes. What descended instead was Rayan. Alone. He landed between both armies, raised no weapon, and spoke. "Lay down your pride, or test your strength against the last memory of Earth." They chose neither. They chose peace, not because he threatened them, but because he stood like someone who had nothing to prove. Across the stars, the second era of humanity did not march. It unfolded. The newly awakened humans, thousands of them, scattered across ancient vaults and cryo-chambers, rose not as conquerors, but as sentinels. They did not rebuild an empire. They reawakened a standard. On Rymth's shadow moons, 3 awakened humans brokered peace between 4 species, locked in war for over a century. On Valor Station, a child who had never seen a Terran flag watched 2 humans rebuild a library before rebuilding defenses. No cities were burned, no planets seized, but order returned, not through blood, but through presence. Kalo Viren chronicled everything. In every system they visited, he recorded stories. A healer who had once served during the Jupiter Exodus, now tending to a new generation of wounded. A teacher who walked among broken schools, rebuilding not brick, but belief. One day, Kalo asked Rayan, "You could have taken it all back. The stars, the council, the systems." Rayan replied, "That would mean we learned nothing." Kalo frowned. "But they still fear you." Rayan looked toward the dark between galaxies. "Good. Let fear remind them what we chose not to become." And still, there were those who resisted. A rogue admiral on Othos Prime launched a fleet against a human settlement. She sent 3 carriers. They never returned. Rayan sent no retaliation, only a message: "Try again. You will disappear, not by force, but by forgetting." The admiral fled. And the stars remembered. At the edge of the Perseid line, the vigilant dawn landed once more. The last sleeper chamber was opened. A woman emerged. Her name was Saela Voss, Rayan's sister. She blinked at the light, then smiled. "You waited for me." Rayan nodded. "We waited for everyone." And with that, the first circle was complete. The humans were not gods, not rulers. They were anchors. And as the stars spun forward again, the galaxy did not collapse. It stabilized, because the ones who had once carried the weight of 1,000 worlds were carrying again. But this time, with care. The Grand Conclave met beneath a sky carved from artificial stars. Delegates from 600 worlds sat in silence. No translators, no protocol droids, no ceremonial guards, just voices that once ruled galaxies, now too quiet to trust their own breath. At the center stood the relic, a black stone tablet pulled from the ruins of old Earth. On its surface, 10,000 years ago, the final chancellor of the Galactic Council had written one message, etched not in ink, but in fused carbon from the last Terran battlefront. "If they ever awaken, do not resist. There will be no second warning." The words glowed faintly now, reacting to the presence above. Because he had arrived, Rayan Voss stepped into the chamber wearing no armor, no banners, no weapons. Behind him walked only silence. He looked older now, not weak, worn. The way mountains are worn by time, not by collapse. His eyes swept the room slowly, then settled on the chancellor's empty seat. A delegate rose, shaking. "What do you want?" Rayan looked around the chamber and spoke calmly. "I want the memory of what we chose to be preserved, not twisted, not buried, not feared." Another delegate stood. "You've already reclaimed power." Rayan shook his head. "Number, I've reminded you that we never wanted it." A murmur rippled. He stepped forward, toward the stone. "My people do not return to enslave. We return because you forgot the cost of forgetting." He placed a hand on the relic, and the chamber dimmed. Above them, the projection dome came alive. Images filled the sky, not of battles, of moments. A human farmer replanting a garden on a colony bombed into ash. A Terran engineer teaching a child from a rival species how to rebuild a water pump. A nurse who had lost her entire squad in the old war, choosing to stay behind in a plague zone simply to hold someone's hand. "We were not your monsters," Rayan said. "We were your mirror." He turned to face them all. "And now, we are your reminder." The chamber fell to silence again. Then one delegate, a long-boned scholar from the Visari systems, slowly bowed. Not deeply, but enough. Then another, and another. until 600 beings from 600 worlds stood together, not in fear, but in respect. Outside the chamber, the vigilant dawn waited in the stars, and across the galaxy, the last sleeper pods faded from blue to gold. The reawakening was complete. Humanity was home. But more than that, humanity was remembered, not as tyrants, not as myths, but as those who came back when no one expected them, and made the galaxy better just by being there. Would you have feared them or followed them? Would you have buried the warning or lived by it? Share in the comments. Was Rain's return justice, or simply the echo of what the stars had long been missing?